friends, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. And today I wanted to talk about the many different methods of food preservation. So we're going to be covering the benefits of each as well as some of the downfalls. So there isn't just one way that's better than all the rest. Now, it might be that there's one way that's better for you than everything else. But if you're like most of us, you may like to preserve your food in many different ways because of the different ways that you're going to use them and the different benefits that each one has. So I was hoping, especially for those people that are new to the idea of food preservation, that I could share with you some different ideas that you can explore for yourself and then weigh out the benefits as well as the cons to each different one. Now I'm going to be talking specifically about preserving fresh produce and herbs. I have a video that's just about storing fats and other foods that are, you might purchase that are already dried, like nuts and chocolate chips, and I will link to some of those down below. So this is just about fresh things, whether it be stuff that you buy from the store or that you grow on your own. So let's start first of all with a root cellar. So if, unlike us, you live in a place where you can have a root cellar and you do have a root cellar, root cellars are a great way to store your fresh produce that are root vegetables and squash. Those kind of things can preserve all year long in a cool place without actual refrigeration. In fact, sometimes do better without refrigeration as long as they're kept in a pretty cool place. And this is where root cellars really come in handy because the climate stays pretty controlled because they're not going to freeze, but they're also not going to get too warm. So things like potatoes, sweet potatoes, turnips, carrots, and as I said, squash, so your butternut, your acorn squash, your pumpkins. Now, I did do a video about how I store my potatoes from the garden to get them to last through the year without rotting, since we don't have a root cellar. But even if you do have a root cellar, the methods I show in that video with the straw or whatever kind of dry thing that you have that you can keep your root vegetables somewhat separated so they're not touching each other, that's going to be recommended for all of them, whether it be carrots or turnips or beets or whatever. So I recommend you check out that video that I'll be linking to in the description box down below. Now, the problem with a root cellar, as with us, is not everybody has a place. Maybe they don't have space, or maybe they're renting and so they can't have a root cellar. A lot of times just using the coldest room or closet in your house can work for most things, like we do with the potatoes. So that can be a way that you can keep your vegetables, at least those kind, stored for a long period of time and keep them in their most nutrient dense form. Another good thing to store in your root cellars would be your fermented foods. And with that in mind, let's move on to talking about fermentation as a form of preserving your produce. Though I do like to ferment, I don't use it for everything. Now, some people like to preserve everything out of their garden in that way, and that's great, but there's a reason why I don't do that. One reason why is because it's really going to be best if you can store them in a root cellar. Me, I use the refrigerator. I don't even trust storing them on the shelf in our back room where I keep the potatoes for long term. And it's not because they will spoil, but because if they bubble over, they're going to get messy. And the warmer they get, the more likely they are to bubble over. And I also don't like to have all of my foods fermented because, well, one, Patrick doesn't like very many fermented foods at all. And I like quite a few. But mostly the things that I ferment, besides kimchi, which Patrick won't touch, I love kimchi. And so that's something I make just to eat because I love kimchi, not so much as a way to preserve food. But when it comes to actually preserving in the form of fermentation, one of my favorite things to do is garlic. Now, this garlic here is about a year old. It's been fermented. I pulled it out of the fridge, which is where I keep it. And here's one that I just started yesterday. So you can see the difference. One is very cloudy while the other one is not. So that's just normal that your fermented foods will take on a cloudy appearance and even lose some of their color. But the benefits of using fermentation as a way to preserve is it's a good way to not only keep all your nutrients in your fresh produce, but you also get the benefits of the probiotics, as well as you're able to keep them raw. But you have to keep in mind too, if you're going to cook with it like I often do with the garlic, you're going to lose a lot of those good probiotics when you go to cook with it. Once you heat it, you're going to lose a lot of that. But it's still a viable form of preserving, so you can keep it fresh and whole without having to worry about it going bad. So whether it be the garlic I buy at Costco like I did here, or garlic that I've dug up from my own garden and then went through all the laborious work of peeling it and then preserving it this way, it is my favorite way because it's not going to wither up like it sometimes does when you hang them. You know, because another thing, by the way, going back to root cellars, garlic and onions are another great thing. As long as you hang them, like you can braid them, if you leave the greens on there, or put them in stockings in different ways like that. A root cellar is a great place for garlic and onions. But I like to have mine ready, all peeled and ready to go. So if I want to add it to something right away and I want it as fresh as possible, maybe I don't feel like using the dried garlic this time, then I can just pull out some garlic and chop it up and it's ready to go. This is also what I use to add to the honey for that honey infused garlic and the other spices I use. And if you're interested in that recipe, it's my own personal one. I'll link to it down below. It's going to be a little different than other people's recipes that you see on the honey infused garlic because, well, that's just the way I am. Again, you don't have to follow any of my recipes to the T, just tailor them to suit you. But anyway, garlic is just an excellent thing to store up on anyway, whether you grow it yourself, which for most people is going to be really easy, or you buy it like I did, get it in bulk, get it fresh. And I mean, really, it's a pretty good price when you can get it at Costco like this. And I don't remember how big it is, but it fills up 2 quart jars plus another pint. And then you can ferment it and keep it in your fridge, and it will last forever in there as long as you keep it in there. But if you're interested in more on fermenting, I will, and you know, this is a 3-day process and I use a fermentation starter. You can also use whey. I'll link to the video I did on fermenting garlic. Same applies for fermenting onions. I like to use this now for fermenting onions. Though onions can keep for a long time, they'll keep even longer than, you know, since we don't have a good root cellar. I've tried storing them in the back room where I keep the potatoes, even hanging up. They last for quite a while, but still not as long as I would like them to. So by preserving them in a fermented form, it's a way that I can still keep them raw and use them in stir fries and those kind of things and still have that little bit of crunchiness to them and the rawness. And I really prefer that for those. But I also do use a lot of dehydrated onions and garlic, but those are the ones I buy, not the ones I grow myself. If I grow them myself, I preserve them differently, and then I just buy them dehydrated from Mother Earth products. The downfall though to your fermented foods, again, like I said, is if you live in a place that's really warm and you don't have a pretty cool place to keep them, it could be problematic for you because they might bubble over and get messy. They can still keep for a very long time in a warmer environment, but I don't know how long. Usually as long as you don't open them, they're fine, but you can still have problems with them bubbling over as they continue to ferment and making a mess wherever it is that you store them, you know, if it's in a warm place. Now let's talk a little bit about dehydrating. So right here, these are all things I've dehydrated myself from my own garden. So I've got zucchini. Really, when it comes to zucchini, my very favorite way to preserve it is dehydrated. One of the reasons why is that I can fit 8 good-sized zucchinis into a jar this size. This is a quart jar. 8 good-sized zucchinis. I'm talking ones that are about this big, into a jar like this once it's dehydrated. Maybe it's 4 big ones. I think maybe it's 8 when I powder it up. Then it will take up half that amount of room so I can fit even more in there. So I might be getting my numbers wrong. I'm not trying to exaggerate, at least not intentionally. But even if it's 4 big zucchinis, look how little room this is taking up by doing this. And it's going to preserve it forever. As long as you keep it vacuum sealed. When you're talking about dehydrated and freeze-dried foods, keeping it vacuum sealed is what prevents it from getting moisture in the jar and thus turning stale. And so that's why I do like to vacuum seal that. I also, like right here, you know, I just brought out a few examples, but I can show you lots of pictures. But here I've got some dehydrated plantain, some snow peas, which is dehydrating snow peas. The two best ways to preserve snow peas is dehydrating and freezing. And then here I've got some dehydrated pumpkin that I can powder up if I want at any time for using for flavoring. But I left it in pieces more for making extracts and so on, whatever else I decide to do with it. And then here I've got some dehydrated nasturtium flowers. So all of these, and this is just a small sampling of the things I've dehydrated from my garden. So the benefits of dehydrating is that over, let's say, and compared to canning, when you dehydrate your produce, your herbs, your fruits, your vegetables, they're going to take up a lot less room in your food storage than your home canned goods. So you can see these carrots that are in here. I don't know, remember how many carrots are in here, but I've dehydrated carrots before, and you can fit at least twice as many carrots into a jar this size than you can if you can them fresh like I did here. And then the other thing about dehydration is that you're going to preserve more of the nutrients in dehydrating than you will in canning because of the high heat it takes to process foods, whether it be water bath or pressure canned. Because of the heat, you're going to lose some of the nutrients. So if you're one that's looking at trying to save as much space as well as nutrients, dehydrating is a really good method to use. Now, again, for me, I use all of the methods. I use everything. And also, and another thing I wanted to say about dehydrating, especially when it comes to herbs, is that if you're into making extracts, any kind of medicinal things, teas, dehydrating is going to be the best way to have it. Now, you can make teas, like herbal infusions, great with fresh herbs. I do it all the time when they're coming in fresh. But by dehydrating up all the excess, then I can have plenty to last through the whole year. Now, nasturtium flowers I don't use for teas. This I dehydrate up for using anything like making soaps and homemade shampoos, anything that I'm going to use in or on my hair, including my homemade hair growth stimulating oil that I also have a recipe on that I'll put down below. Plantain. Again, dehydrated is best, especially if you're infusing an oil. You really want to use dehydrated products. Extracts can be made with fresh or dehydrated, but to get a real good, powerful medicinal extract, you can pack a lot more dehydrated herbs and make a good, strong tincture that way than you can using the fresh into a jar, because when it's fresh, it's going to have a lot of water content. But when you remove that water and then go to make an extract out of it, now you're going to have a stronger extract by doing it that way. So that's why dehydrating can be very beneficial when it comes to that. Now let's talk about freeze-dried food as a form of food preservation. Now, I don't have a freeze dryer, but I do like to purchase freeze-dried foods. We still go back and forth on buying a freeze dryer. They're pretty expensive, and they're large and they're noisy. But when I was watching Living Traditions video on their freeze dryer, they went ahead and invested in one, and it looks like they're making them a little more compact than they used to be, while still giving you the same amount of space for the food they are going to freeze dry. So that's kind of made me rethink possibly getting one. Before, they were just so big and bulky, and it's like, man, where would I even keep that thing? They're pretty expensive, but if you really like freeze-dried foods and preserving your food in that way, it might be a good idea to look into investing into one. And I recommend you check out Living Traditions Homestead and their videos about their freeze dryer, because again, like I said, they've got me rethinking it. But for now, I've been happy to purchase freeze-dried foods. Now, what's the benefit of freeze-dried foods over foods that you can dehydrate yourself for a lot less money than what it costs for a freeze dryer? Well, the great thing about freeze-dried foods, such as these strawberries right here, and these are organic. Sometimes Mother Earth Products does have the organic strawberries, and when it comes to buying strawberries, I only get organic ones. I do not buy conventional grown strawberries because they're one of the worst for chemicals in the fruit, as far as, if you go conventional. But anyway, it preserves the flavors of your fruits and vegetables where it tastes like literally tastes like you're eating the fresh fruit or vegetable, except for it's dry and it's crispy. It's almost bizarre. So when I first started buying freeze-dried foods, in particular things that I either can't grow or things that I just use a lot of that I want more of in my food storage. Like I can grow strawberries, but I'm still trying to work on building my strawberry patch. I've been trying different types of strawberries to find the ones that are going to do best for us. So anyway, I don't get enough for the way I want to use them. And same thing goes with raspberries. And sweet corn, we haven't done well at growing sweet corn yet. So that's one of the things I buy freeze-dried. And this particular one is organic and non-GMO. And boy, I tell you, same thing. You can eat this corn right out of this jar, because if I get a big package, then I'll repackage it into jars like this and vacuum seal it. If you want to keep it from getting stale, you need to vacuum seal, but no moisture absorbers or oxygen absorbers. I mean, none of that kind of stuff in there. So anyway, that flavor, so if you want to eat it as a snack out of here, boy, it's just so good. These jars, I only have these ones out because these are the ones I currently am working through right now, so they're the handiest. But I have pineapple, mangoes, all kinds of freeze-dried fruits, and so I have a lot of those, and they are so good as is. But the other great thing about freeze-dried foods is that you can, not only do they hold on to their nutrients better than dehydrating and canning, and really have that just powerful, wonderful, fresh flavor to them. And they rehydrate better than your dehydrated stuff. Almost all of your dehydrated stuff isn't going to rehydrate near as well as your freeze-dried. However, there are things that I actually prefer to have dehydrated over freeze-dried, such as mushrooms, depending on what I'm using them in. So I have both freeze-dried mushrooms and dehydrated mushrooms. If I'm wanting to use the mushrooms whole or wanting to rehydrate them for using as a pizza topping, I prefer dehydrated. When I'm wanting to make a sauce out of them, then I like a mushroom sauce or mushroom gravy, which I have a video on. Then I really like using the freeze-dried mushrooms, because you can powder it right up, or it will break down and just add some nice flavor that you can spread throughout the whole sauce. But that's the one downside to freeze-dried foods, is some of them, the corn will stay whole, but certain ones will kind of turn to mush when you try to rehydrate them. Not all, just certain ones. A lot of them will still hold their shape when you go to rehydrate them, but some of them just kind of want to turn to mush. The other downside to freeze drying, though, so it's another one of those things you have to weigh out, is that freeze-dried foods take up as much space as canned foods. And the reason for that is when they're freeze-dried, they're going to hold their same shape and size. So you can look at these strawberry slices here. They're roughly still the same size as when they were fresh. But if I had dehydrated them, they're going to dehydrate up a lot smaller. And that has to do with the process of how freeze drying works. So freeze drying, you actually are freezing the things that are in there, and then it's that, I forget the name of it, but I'll put the word here, the process. And then it takes those frozen ice pieces inside the fruit or vegetable or whatever it is that you're freeze drying, and then turns that into a gas. And so what happens then is that whatever that is going to continue to hold that same shape and size, but now you've got a lot of airspace in there, and that's why they get crispy and very lightweight. So that's the difference. So they're going to take up more room. So if space is limited, freeze drying or buying freeze dried foods may not be beneficial to you, or you may want to just limit it to certain things where having that good powerful strawberry flavor, or that flavor, that wonderful flavor of the sweet corn or whatever it is important, or the pineapple. Oh my goodness. Well, dehydrated pineapple, though, I've dehydrated pineapple before, and that is really good. The flavor is a little bit different, as is the texture, but it is still really good. It actually does hold its flavor pretty good dehydrated, though the freeze-dried tastes very fresh. It just still blows me away, but both are good and so wonderful to snack on. No added sugar, just eating it as is. Oh man, it's so good. All right, now let's talk a little bit about freezing. Freezing is probably, I don't know, it's probably be about on par with freeze drying as far as preserving the nutrients in the food. It's one of the best ways you can preserve the food and still keep a good high percentage of the nutrients. And it's easy. Whether it be you do like I do with a lot of my stuff now, is pack it into jars and then freeze it, or you use food saver bags or Ziploc bags. It can be so quick and easy to do that. Now, one of the things I do really like to freeze are bell peppers. So I will pick up, on occasion, I'll pick up bell peppers, especially if I can find them organic, which is almost impossible around here. And so usually I try to avoid bell peppers because it's hard to find organic ones, and those are the ones you got to be most careful of. But every now and then it's like, man, I miss having bell peppers. I love having them on my pizza and adding them to dishes like scrambled eggs, making scramblers. It adds color and flavor. And freezing is my favorite method for those, because not only is it easy, it preserves the color, it preserves the flavor. I've tried dehydrated bell peppers before, just not the same. Now, freeze-dried bell peppers are pretty good in that way. So you could do that if you're concerned about freezer space or concerned about power outages. So that's the drawback to being dependent on your freezer, is if you don't have a backup power source like solar panels or a gas generator, then you got to really consider the amount of stuff you're going to freeze. So that's the main downside, but there are plenty of things I like to freeze. The other way I like to preserve zucchini, by the way, is to chunk it up and freeze it. I don't like to grate it and freeze it. Some people do, but you can do that if you like to make a lot of zucchini bread, or even fritters like you can do with the potatoes and the carrots and even a little bit of meat. You can make some really yummy fritters out of those. But I just like to chunk it up and freeze it like that, and I'll use those for certain kind of bakes where I can just throw a jar, I'll thaw out a jar, it thaws out pretty quickly, and throw that in there with whatever it is I want. It does get very soft though once you freeze it and thaw it out. It's going to be a lot softer. It's almost going to be like it's almost cooked all the way through, but it's still good. I've had really good success freezing it. I do freeze a lot of the meats, and all the meats in our freezer have either been local wild caught meats or locally grown beef. The chicken is the only one that we have, even though we have chickens, our chickens are layers, and we have yet to process any of them for meat. At any rate, I do still like having plenty of whole chickens in my freezer, and those are the only ones that aren't local. I get as local as I can, but those are organically raised chickens. That's the only kind I'll buy, and I'll keep those in the freezer. And then, so I like doing that with chicken. I like to store it in the freezer. So then I can just take out a whole chicken, bake it up, and then I can make meals that can last us, just the two of us, it can last us for 2 weeks, the amount of meals I can make off of one chicken. And by the way, I have a whole series just on making the most of leftovers. So where I covered different things, like if I baked a chicken, here's what I'm going to do with the first night. Here's another recipe you can make and out of the leftover chicken meat, and so on and so forth. I did the same thing with roast, whether it be elk, venison, or beef, and even fish. So all the many things that you can do with the leftover meat. So if you're curious about that, I'll link to the whole playlist I have down below on different ways that you can use up your leftover meats and make many new dishes out of it. So I think that's pretty much it for freezing. So yes, freezing is going to preserve the flavor and the color better than canning will. But again, you need to consider what are ways that you can back that up if you lose your public power, assuming you are on public power. Even if you're on solar power, anything can happen and you can lose that too. So these are the things you have to think of. What are you going to be your backup sources for your freezers and refrigerators if you're depending on those for preserving your foods? All right, so one of the last things I'm going to talk about is canning for preserving. Now, and what are the benefits of this? I mean, we already know from what I've talked about is that canning is going to be the way that you're going to lose most of your nutrients. So why would anyone want to can their food? Well, There's several reasons why. When it comes to green beans, I find these are my homegrown green beans. I like the flavor of the green beans best when they're preserved by canned. I've frozen them before. I've been happy with that. I've dehydrated them before. They work good, but again, they don't rehydrate as well. But I like the flavor of them best when they're canned. And here's the other big thing when you're talking about canned foods is, yes, they're going to take up more room than dehydrated, and no, they're not going to have as many nutrients. However, they're going to be a far more healthy form of a quote-unquote fast food, and it is a way you can preserve for years and years to come. As long as your jars stay sealed, these can last for many years. Many years. I've had jars of canned meat that was 5 years old, still good. And meat, by the way, home canned meat, boy, it sure is tasty. It adds a lot of flavor to the meat when you can it, especially if you decide to add any kind of spices to it or even some kind of broth of any kind when you go to can your meat or potatoes. But anyway, canned foods are a way that you can have stuff that's quick and easy when you need it, for when life is really stressful. You realize, oops, I forgot to pull the chicken or the roast or whatever it was out of the freezer, and now you don't have time for it to thaw out. Or you don't have time to worry about trying to get all your foods rehydrated that you've got dehydrated up, and you want something that's quick and easy. Usually for me, it's the vegetable thing. Like, I might make this nice meal, but then it's like, oh, I want a vegetable side. Darn, I forgot about that. I forgot to pull some of my frozen snow peas, because that's my favorite way to preserve my homegrown snow peas, is to freeze them. That's my very favorite way. And I forgot to pull those out. Well, I can go grab a can of the carrots or the green beans that I have canned up. So when it comes to vegetables, these are the two that I can up the most. I do occasionally can up potatoes. Not my favorite way. I do like them. And they are definitely nice to have on hand for when I'm making potato salad. That's my favorite way to use home canned potatoes, and why I like having home canned potatoes. If it's like, oh, hey, we're gonna do a picnic today. Can you bring a potato salad? Okay, wow, do I have time to peel, cut, and cook them and all that? Well, I can just go grab a jar or two of my home canned potatoes and rinse them out, and then throw my potato salad together, and it's done. And that's one of the things I love about home canned potatoes. But that's one of the benefits, is when something gets tossed at you all of a sudden, or you realize you forgot something, or life has just been real stressful and you don't have the time. Maybe you had a death in the family or whatever is going on, and it's like, you just don't have the energy to worry about trying to cook something from scratch. Well, if you've already got foods canned up, like I always can up salsa. I always have lots of homemade salsa canned up. It is so nice to have on hand. And I do always have canned tomatoes. That's the other vegetable, just plain canned tomatoes, because I can actually whip up some various different kinds of sauces based off those. But I do also have a little bit of canned homemade spaghetti or Italian sauce and some homemade chili for those times when life is just crazy and I forgot something, or I just got so busy and realized that I just totally spaced dinner altogether. And so one of the other things I started canning this year was to also make room in the freezer, was pulling out some of the hamburger, thawing it out, making meatballs and canning those up. And I did make some meatballs and gravy out of those one time, and they were really good. It was easy. So all I had to do basically was make the gravy. The meatballs were done, and we always like to serve it over rice. You can serve it over noodles as well, and that just makes it easy. So that's what those are for. I don't have a ton of that stuff canned up, but I do have several different things like that to have on hand for those crazy times. And let me tell you, when things get really ugly, those ready to eat meals, those are things you can eat straight out of the jar. You don't even have to cook it, because the canning process already cooks them. So even if you can't heat them through for whatever reason, because you don't have any power source or any way to heat them up, you can eat them right out of the jar cold. If you're hungry, they're definitely going to taste good. I tell you what, that home canned meat, especially the beef roast or the venison or the elk, oh my goodness, they're so good. Straight out of the jar, even cold. I mean, they're good. Not only will these foods keep in the jars for years, they are ready to go for when you need them. So For me, I like to use all the different ways to preserve foods. Now, one of the things I didn't cover was salt curing. I've never actually done that, other than I don't know if you could count the jerky that I make. That's because it does kind of a high salt content, but I also still dehydrate it and then preserve it in jars by vacuum sealing into jars and putting on the shelf. There's still that method, and maybe some people who have some information on salt curing. That's typically used with meats, and I don't know if it's used for anything else. I think it's only used for meats. And so anyone who's got experience in that, do you do that and why? How do you use that meat once you do that? Go ahead and share with us your experience on that down below. And if you know of anyone that has a really good video on how to salt cure, then go ahead and link to that as well. So there are all the methods, at least all the methods I use, and some of your different pros and cons according to the different ways to preserve your food, so you can decide what's best for you or what's best according to what it is you're doing. Now, you might not even know until you try it. So you may decide to freeze up some green beans and then can a little bit of green beans and compare them side by side, or dehydrate some. And you might even find that each one has different uses. So let's say the dehydrated snow peas and green beans that I've done myself, those are things I will throw in my soups. That's the only thing I use those for. I use my frozen peas or my canned green beans for everything else. So it just really depends on what you're doing. But any soups, I always use my dehydrated stuff, whether it be the stuff I get from Mother Earth products or the stuff I dehydrate myself, like the zucchini. I'm always using this. It gets added to my Italian sauces. It gets added to my soups and stews, whatever it is I'm making. As long as it has some kind of liquid it can cook in, that's usually the way that I rehydrate my freeze-dried and dehydrated stuff anyway. Oh, and also if you're interested, I have a video just on how I use my dehydrated and freeze-dried foods, because there's many different things that you can do with these besides just cooking with them. And I'm always creating new ideas, you know, whether it be extract making or using to powder up and making some kind of frosting or something. I have a lot of different ideas. I'll link to the video I did on that, just the many ways that you can use those, down below as well if you're curious. And anyway, so I hope this gives you a good idea and helps you kind of think through what's going to work best for you. And please do not let anybody get sanctimonious with you and try to make you feel guilty because of the way you choose to preserve your foods. That's got to be up to you, what's best for you and your family and your situation, the climate you live in, and the amount of space you have. These are all things we have to take into account. And so again, this is why there's not one way that's going to be best for every person, and no one should be made to feel less than because they're not doing it somebody else's way. And please share with us down below, what are your favorite ways to preserve different types of foods? Do you use all the methods? Do you use mostly one method, and why? So everybody can also learn from you as well. All right, well, thanks for watching. Take care and God bless.